Hello guys, this is your friend Shinobi Nexus 2.0 and we are back in new fanfic. What if Sakura chose Naruto but it was too late? Part 1. Have you ever noticed that when you don't talk to somebody that you were close with for a long time, it's harder to strike up a conversation with them than it is with a casual acquaintance? The casual acquaintance is easy to talk to. You ask simple questions and get simple answers. But with that person you used to hold dear, it's impossible. You already know their deepest, darkest secrets, their dreams. And most importantly, what they think of you. So there's just an awkward silence. You can't act as if the past few years didn't happen, and you were both there, so you don't want to talk about the past few years either. You just stare into his blue eyes and see he hates you. His dreams are gone and he's empty, petty, and cynical. You wonder how much the rest of his face has changed, but you'll probably never know since he's always wearing that infernal Anbu mask. You want to take his mask off, touch his face and beg for forgiveness. You want to hold him and never let him go. But, no, he'll turn to leave and you'll let him, just like all the other times you've passed by each other outside the Hokage's office. Then, as if it had moved on its own, Sakura's arm reached out and her hand seemed to be in on the arm's plan, because it grabbed his hand. Then when he swivels his head around to look at her, her neck betrays her as well, turning her head to look at him. They stare, and stare. He then breaks the silence they have held for 3 long years. What do you want, Haruno-san? His voice is brutally monotone. There is no cheerfulness, no immaturity, and worst of all, there is no Sakura-chan. She doesn't know how to answer his question. What does she want? She thought she knew at one point. She wanted to be a kunoichi, she wanted to marry Sasuke-kun, and she wanted to live happily ever after. But then, all of a sudden, there was no more Sasuke-kun. He had left her and betrayed the village. Naruto, he had been there. She asked him to bring back Sasuke, bring back what she wanted. He had failed. She then began to search with him, and together they could do it, right? Still they failed, and as she grew closer to Naruto, she grew confused. She would catch herself wanting new things, wanting Naruto. Wanting to be by his side as he had been by hers. She wanted to help defeat the Akatsuki so that he could be safe. She wanted him for herself. Then, when the time came to choose between the two paths, she chose the wrong. Haruno-san. That damn Haruno-san again. Naruto, was that all she could say? She didn't exactly plan this conversation, and even though she had rehearsed her apology thousands of times, she was completely lost. Yes, Haru. Stop calling me that. She didn't mean to yell like that, but it just seemed to happen. He wasn't startled, and he still hadn't moved since she grabbed his hand. Can we talk someplace? That seemed like a good start. No. Well, maybe not such a good start. I'm tired. I'm going home. Well, I'll walk you then. She wasn't going to have this be the last thing they said to each other in their lives. He remained still. His eyes blank, unreadable. But then they wavered. He took his hand out of hers, and left her hand feeling extremely cold. Fine. It was barely audible, but it was there, nonetheless. As he began to leave, she quickly caught up to him and walked by his side. They walked silently through the streets. It was early in the afternoon. The sun was high in the sky and peeking through the leaves of the trees lining the streets over their heads. The weather was fair. A nice warm day. They could hear the markets busy with mothers and wives buying the groceries for tonight's dinner a few blocks over. If one was to see them strolling together, they would think nothing of it. The Hokage's assistant and an Anbu walking together. They seemed to fit somehow. A few ninjas sitting in a BBQ restaurant across the street saw the two walking together and were immediately perplexed. The gossip moved her honey blonde bangs to the side to get a clearer look. The fat one was busy piling food off the grill into his mouth but stared out of the corner of his eye at the odd pair walking down the street. The genius was the one that seemed most interested. He didn't see this move coming for a few more years. He had predicted that one day they would set aside their problems enough to at least talk to one another. But he was off on the time frame, and he wondered what exactly was going on. The three of them watched as the two walked by. After getting over the shock of the scene, they promptly paid and went off to find a certain sixth ninja. Sakura didn't know what was happening, they just kept walking. He had a deliberate pace. He wasn't even acknowledging her. He seemed as if this was the same walk he took every time he headed home from a debriefing with the Hokage. She was afraid to be the first to talk again, but he seemed as if he didn't care if this was going to turn into any kind of conversation. So, do you live in the same apartment? Yes. Well, that was a lame attempt to begin the conversation she wanted to have for the past 3 years, she chided herself. They remained silent for the rest of the walk. She had no idea what to say, and it didn't seem that he was going to start any sort of exchange of words. They walked the dirt streets of their hometown and came to his door. He put the key in the doorknob and began to turn it. Then he stopped, sighed and looked at the girl that had accompanied him home. Would you like to come in? He was still monotone, but at least he didn't call her Haruno-san. Sure. She replied. He continued to open the door and they stepped inside. His place was different than she remembered. It was simple still, but it was much cleaner. She stood in the living room, somewhat afraid to leave the place where she stood. He walked in and began to take his armor off. The chest plate, followed by the gauntlets, then the shin protectors. He threw them carelessly on the floor by a couple of other objects that seemed to be his Jonin vest and forehead protector. Then he moved his hand to his mask. He held it there for what seemed like an eternity. She wanted to see his face, but he seemed unsure of what to do. Then his hand very slowly came down with the mask in it. His hair had grown, it was still golden but not the vibrant color she knew before. It was dull and plain. His hairs came down into his eyes and around his face, shadowing his features. But she did see the whiskers. The 6 lines that marked him made him stand out. It was Naruto all right, and she couldn't help cracking a smile at seeing his face after such a long time. He then looked at her and threw the mask into the pile of his other things. He was just left in his black Anbu tank top and baggy black pants. He then walked over to a bench under a window and sat down to look outside. She slowly moved around the room inspecting things. He had nothing that she could really look at though. Blank walls. Blank table. She looked at his pile of ninja belongings and picked it up. She then sat down on his couch and began to place his Anbu armor on the table, followed by his Jonin vest, then his Hitai, and finally his mask. It was a fox, beautifully carved, and painted a dark shade of orange. She looked down at her handiwork. If you put a glass cover over his coffee table, it would look like a fancy display case. She looked up and on a dusty shelf way up high she saw an item that surprised her. It was the picture of Team 7 they all had a copy of. She stood up and made a beeline for it. He was watching her out of the corner of his eye. She picked it up and wiped the glass. She softly smiled at the 3 boys and herself. The ill-tempered rivals, their famous sensei, and she. We made one lousy team, didn't we? He said from his seat under the window. Lousy? She asked, a little irritated. We were the best. We were the next Sanin. And everyone said we were the best 3 of our generation. She proclaimed boastfully. Yes, each of us became exceptional ninja, but after that the team disbanded. He was right. She slowly looked back down at the frame. They split up and was each taught by one of the original Sanin. She looked back at him. His attention was back outside the window. Her eyes came to his left shoulder. The Anbu tattoo, the symbol given to the village's elite ninja entrusted as the personal bodyguard of the Hokage. Her friends that were also in Anbu gave her tidbits about how he was doing. Mainly Neji, Kiba, and Shino. The others had become Jonin instructors while she and Ino headed up the medical corps. They were heralded as the greatest generation in Konoha history. The 11 that saved Konoha in the Great War. The 11 that could not be stopped. But they had fallen apart. Barely seeing each other. And he was the one she never spoke to. She sighed at the state of the fabled 11. I miss you. It was sudden. It was impulsive. And it was completely unlike her, but it had to be said. He didn't move. Did you hear me? She was becoming angrier. Why couldn't he just accept her apology and everything could go back to the way it was? I think you should leave. This just made her even more irate. No, we can't just not talk to each other. Pretend we don't know each other. She felt her cheeks become wet with hot, salty tears. We were a team. We were comrades. We were what? He was suddenly standing, yelling, shaking. I loved you. He moved half a step towards her, then stopped himself. He clenched his fists and continued in a more controlled voice, you just wanted him back so you used me. Made me feel things, made me believe that. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? He roared back. I left me to die. She had no response. Her voice was gone, and he had become a blurry image through her tears. He was quiet now. He took a deep breath and all of a sudden he was the blank-faced, apathetic Anbu operative once again. He walked to the bedroom and shut the door. She wiped the tears from her face the best she could and waited for him to come out again. She waited almost an hour when she realized that he wasn't coming back. The Naruto she knew had just walked out of her life. She silently left. All that was left was the picture of a team long disbanded, and an organized table of armor. The 9 ninjas were together, excited to see the 2 comrades that hadn't talked to each other in 3 years. They joked, they smiled and they were ready to be one big family again. Together again. Then they saw a solemn pink-haired medic walk down the street right by them. She looked sad, distraught. She didn't even see the large group of her friends through her teary eyes. Then a realization hit the 9 at the same moment. They stood for a while just staring off into space. Then they began to leave, splintering off. Their hopes had been dashed. The reunion they were all waiting for wasn't going to happen and they weren't going to be together again. She was one of the legendary Sannin. She was the greatest medic nin in the world. She was the 5th Hokage. She shouldn't have to deal with stuff like this. Her pink-haired apprentice and her adoptive grandson were standing in her office and the tension was palpable. Usually when they stood in the same room it was just an uncomfortable silence. Sakura would steal glances at the Anbu and he would look solemn. But no, she was the melancholy one and he was clearly on edge. His back was stiff, arms crossed, demeanor cold. She had hoped that the decision she made today would help these 2 with their situation, but it seemed like something had happened yesterday. Well, she might as well get this over with. I've called you both here for a little announcement. He was paying attention but Sakura still seemed a little out of it. Naruto, I'm making you a captain. His arms dropped to his sides and his head tilted a little bit to the side. Tsunade could tell he was grinning under his mask. Sakura suddenly came back to reality and looked over at Naruto. Tsunade smiled. She was proud of him. He had come a long way since he challenged her to a street fight. Naruto had grown into the best Konoha had to offer, maybe the whole ninja world. He was a hero as a result of his actions in the last war, but despite that he just wasn't as vibrant as he used to be. He had been so melancholy over the past few years, and he and Sakura had completely stopped talking to one another. Nobody exactly knew why either. She had asked the rest of their comrades, but it was no help at all. None of the other 11 had any clues to the reason for Naruto and Sakura's falling out. You'll have a week to name the 3 Anbu operatives you want on your team. She began to shuffle papers on her overflowing desk, looking for the forms he would have to fill out requesting his team. Neji Hyuga, Kiba Inazaka, Shino Aburame. She looked back up at him. She should have known he would pick them. They were the 3 he trusted the most in Anbu. Okay, Consider it done. As for your medic, she looked over to Sakura. She went wide-eyed and stiff. He responded with a simple, no. She looked back at him and he was not happy, but Tsunade was in no mood to argue. This decision is non-negotiable. She replied, eyes closed, hands folded in front of her face. What about Shizune Nichan? He wasn't about to give up easily. She sighed because she knew he never did. She's running the hospital. Yamanaka Ino. She has a genin team. He just grumbled, at which point Tsunade smirked. Naruto didn't know the names of any of the other medic nins in the village. Not making conversation while he was being mended in the hospital these past 3 years had come back to bite him. Tsunade had won. Have my team meet at training ground 6 at 10 a.m. tomorrow. He said quickly and disappeared in a puff of smoke. The Hokage then turned to the other person left in the room. Tsunade studied her apprentice. Sakura was one of the best medics around. She had become pretty well known after defeating Sasori, and her involvement in the destruction of the Akatsuki and the war only added to her reputation. The Konoha 11 were all well known. Sakura had surpassed Shizune and Ino would never catch her. She was her greatest pupil, but right now Sakura didn't look like the proud young woman she was used to seeing. She was looking at her feet, hands in her lap. Tsunade was about to ask the question that had plagued everyone around the remaining members of Team 7. What happened between you two? But before she could say a word, Sakura suddenly shot up from her chair, bowed, and left. Tsunade opened her desk drawer and removed the sake bottle that she hid there. She was upset that the two were on such bad terms. She looked over to a picture on her desk. It was a picture of her genin team. She looked at the white-haired boy and wished he was there. He would know what to do with Naruto. Jiraiya had a way of getting people to open up and change their minds. She missed him. She remembered when that little toad came to her that fateful day. She knew he was dead, and she was alone. Naruto had gone on to avenge his mentor's death and defeat Pain as well as most of Akatsuki. But now Naruto had changed, and she wondered what Jiraiya would think of how he turned out in her care. She imagined he would be disappointed. She continued to drink for some time, dwelling on her past, her mistakes. She wondered what her life would be like if she had stayed with Jiraiya. She wondered what it would be like if she had saved Dan. She let out a silent sob as her emotions overwhelmed her. She soon put the sake away. As the sun went down and the day ended, she sent messengers to Naruto's new team telling them where to be in the morning, then proceeded to try and find a mission to give them. Such was the lonely life of the Hokage. Neji was surprised to hear he was being reassigned, and to a team with a rookie captain no less. But when he arrived at training ground 6 that morning, he was even more surprised to see his new teammates were acquaintances of his. Kiba and Shino would be his teammates. They waited on the last 2 members of his team to arrive, the medic and the new captain. Neji was staring off into space while Kiba and Shino talked about how it would be nice to be on the same squad again, with Akamaru barking in agreement. Training ground 6 was a lake so the 3 had to stand on the water. Neji didn't mind, it felt nice when little waves would lap up over his sandal and cool his toes. The morning mist was beginning to recede. And from the placement of the sun, Neji guessed it was about time for his captain to show. Just as the thought passed through his head, he spotted a figure at the end of the lake. Anime and manga. Naruto was right on time, his team waiting. He had seen Sakura on the way over and informed her that her presence wouldn't be necessary at this training session. The crestfallen look on her face while he told her was worth it. Naruto began to walk out to the 3 on the water. They had already noticed him and were now silent, standing at attention, or in Kiba's case mounted. They looked quite formidable. Neji in his blue hawk mask, Kiba atop Akamaru in his gray dog mask, and Shino in his green ape mask. Naruto smirked. He was going to have some fun. Neji soon saw that it was Naruto who was walking towards them, the fox of the Anbu. Naruto the Anbu captain. It seemed funny that when they were kids Neji thought of him as a nobody with no future, but a loss in his first Chunin exams had taught him different. Then time and again Naruto proved himself. In the war, the Akatsuki fights, and every other time he had seen Naruto fight for the village and his friends. Naruto. Kiba yelled, breaking the silence. You got it, dog boy, and it's Captain Naruto to you. Naruto said in a jovial voice. Ha ha, never in my life would I have seen this coming. Came Kiba's response. Congratulations, Naruto. Neji greeted. Shino remained silent, but he nodded his head in Naruto's direction. Neji took this as a hello. Well, Naruto began, I was thinking that since we're together again we have a little sparring match. Neji rolled his eyes, leave it to Naruto to act unlike any Anbu captain he had ever had before. Suddenly there were two more Narutos. Neji noticed he didn't use any hand signals, that meant all three are clones. Neji quietly activated his Byakugan. Anime and manga. You won't find me, Neji. Neji was suddenly brought back to the situation. I'm not even close by. How did you know I was looking? I can tell. Naruto said, sounding smug. I could tell right away you were just a clone. Kiba boasted, rubbing Akamaru's hair. Clones from so far away? Shino inquired. Naruto smirked and said, I'm just that good, Bugsy. He was still being a little overconfident in Neji's eyes. Naruto wasn't dealing with just anybody, he was dealing with one of the Konoha 11, an Anbu, and most of all, a Hyuga. Well, let's get this started, announced the lead Naruto. Everyone dropped into defensive stances. The entire scene became silent, tranquil, the water was like glass. Then in an instant, it seemed as if the lake was exploding. Massive waves sprang off everywhere as the six fighters went at each other. Neji lost track of the others right away, he had his own Naruto to worry about at the moment. The first attack was a swift kick to Neji's head, Neji blocked with his right forearm easily enough. He returned fire with a left hook which was in turn blocked by Naruto's knee and the two went skidding across the water apart from each other. When their momentum stopped they immediately went back on the offensive at one another again. Naruto had a kunai in his left hand. Neji didn't even see him draw it, and it was thrown at Neji's head just before the two were about to collide. Neji dodged but lost his footing as his sandal slipped beneath the surface. Then, in an instant it was over, Naruto had Neji pinned, one arm behind his back and face in the water. Neji had no idea how Naruto had covered that space in that amount of time. He was over 100 feet away, but as soon as the kunai was over his shoulder, Naruto was on top of him. It was impossible for Naruto to be that fast. Naruto let Neji up. Even with his Byakugan activated, Naruto had somehow gotten the upper hand with little difficulty. He hadn't even used KCM. Then Neji saw it. The kunai Naruto had thrown was embedded in a tree a few hundred feet away at the shore of the lake. It had a tag on it that looked familiar. He looked at Naruto. Family secret. Naruto replied to the unasked question. Neji remembered seeing the reincarnated Minato do something similar in the war. Neji was not happy with his performance against Naruto. Sure, Naruto was good, but Neji was completely outclassed a few moments ago. How good had Naruto really gotten? They had fought side by side in the war, but when you're allies you don't notice what the other is doing as much since you have to focus on fighting your own opponents. How is everyone else faring? Neji asked, hoping he was not the first one to be defeated. Kiba is done, off that way, he said, waving his hand in a general direction. But Shino is proving difficult, he's hiding in the trees. Oh, there he is. Anyway, go to the Hokage's office. I'll be waiting. And then he was nothing more than a puff of smoke. Anime and manga. As Neji walked to the Hokage's office he ran into Kiba and Shino. All three were a little embarrassed by the way Naruto had made quick work of them. Even Kiba was quiet, not wanting to bring up the events that just transpired. The medic was not there. Shino simply stated. Neji hadn't noticed. He forgot that there was another member supposed to be there. Perhaps Naruto didn't seem to think it was important for a medic to show up for a quick spar between old friends. Naruto actually seemed quite chipper today. For the past few years he had become more and more morose. Hinata had been quite distraught and asked Neji to investigate. Neji smiled to himself as he thought about how even though Hinata had become a respected Jonin instructor, her schoolgirl crush had not disappeared, much to the chagrin of Neji's new teammate Kiba. The three came upon the building soon enough and they were about to enter when Kiba put a hand on Neji's shoulder. Neji turned to the dog-masked nin. Have you seen who our medic is? Is she hot? Neji processed what Kiba asked and looked slightly annoyed. Despite this, he turned to Shino and got no response. Then back to Kiba who shrugged, lifted his mask, and winked. Neji understood. It was Byakugan time. Why not? It was always good to go into a situation knowing as much as possible. Neji activated his Byakugan and searched the rooms of the Hokage Tower. There were 3 people sitting in her office. The Hokage was there, naturally. Naruto was also there. And, as shock filled Neji's face, he exclaimed in a hushed voice, "You guys aren't going to believe this." Kiba was alert as he rode Akamaru swiftly through the trees. The nin he was chasing was losing ground. He couldn't keep up with Akamaru's pace. Kiba whispered a few things to the bug on his shoulder and it flew off. The rest of his team would arrive soon. He stood on Akamaru's back and leapt forward at the nin's back. The nin never knew what hit him. Combined with his own jumping ability and the speed Akamaru was already going, Kiba was instantly on the nin and one kunai to the neck ended his life. Kiba stood over the nin's body cleaning his blade, with Akamaru panting beside him. He then bent down and began rummaging through the nin's things. The nin had some weapons, a copy of Ichi Ichi Paradise, some scrolls, one with a seal, which was what they were looking for, and a correspondence between the rock and the rain. As he emptied the dead nin's pouch, a picture fell out. It was of a young woman holding a baby. Kiba slowly picked it up and turned it over in his hands. The back read, "Good luck on your mission, darling. Your son and I await your return." Kiba sighed. He hated when nin had personal effects on them when he killed them. It was easier to be detached when killing another human being if you didn't remember they had a life, a home, a family. Somewhere out there a woman was widowed and a boy was fatherless because of him. Kiba didn't even notice his team arrive, he just kept looking at the baby's face and thinking about how his father never came home from a mission. It wasn't an uncommon thing in a town of ninja. Luckily he had his mother and older sister. Good job, Kiba, Naruto said, bringing Kiba out of his thoughts. Did you get it? Yeah, Kiba said as he absent-mindedly tossed the scroll to his captain. Naruto made quick work of the seal and began to read the scroll. It still dumbfounded Kiba at how strong Naruto had become. He was probably the most accomplished Konoha nin around. And he was on the fast track to being Hokage. Soon all the major houses would have an ally of Naruto at its head. The council would be made up of his comrades and he would be chosen to succeed Tsunade. Kiba was confident that Naruto would be great as Hokage, even though they had had only a few missions as an Anbu team. He had seen Naruto do great things. He had also seen him be a complete jerk. Kiba unintentionally scrunched his face under his mask at Naruto. Naruto had beat down Sakura at every chance he got, and the usually fiery Kunoichi had just stood there and taken it every time. He imagined her sad face beneath her new mask, a cat with black markings. He had half expected her to choose a pink mask, but she had told him it was too unprofessional. We're heading back in the morning. Shino, dispose of the body, then set up a perimeter around the site with your insects. Kiba, you and Akamaru take a rest. Sakura, make the camp. Neji, you're with me. We'll take a patrol of the area. And with that, he and Neji were gone in a flash. Kiba laid down using Akamaru as a backrest and Shino's insects began eating the body. Kiba always thought it was a terrible way for a nin to go, but the lack of a body as evidence was always good for the team. Kiba lifted his mask and turned his attention back to the picture. It's not good to dwell on stuff like that. Kiba turned his head to see Sakura standing next to him. Yeah, well, it's hard not to. She lifted her mask and gave him an understanding smile. So, he began slowly watching her set up the camp. Why do you take that shit from Naruto all the time? He's the captain, she said plainly. Yeah, but the Sakura I know would punch him in the face for talking to her like that. He chuckled. Even if he were the Hokage. Well, it seems like he will be soon enough. Sakura replied. Yup. He's going to have all the clans behind him soon. Hana Nichan will be in charge on the Inazaka, Shikamaru the Nara, Ino the Yamanaka, and Hinata. He trailed off and had a small smile. He was still in love with her, but she still only had eyes for Naruto. So when are you going to ask her out? He was startled and looked up at Sakura standing before him. I have no idea what you're talking about, he said indignantly and lowered his mask. She sat next to him against Akamaru and lifted his mask back up. I hate when you guys wear those things. You wear one too, he replied. She sighed and looked up at the darkening sky. The stars would come out soon. I know you don't like the Anbu, why did you agree to join? He asked. Tsunade-sama asked me to. It's more than that. Drop it. Geez, he said, putting his hands behind his head. Didn't have to bite my head off. She got up and began to walk back to finish setting up camp. What's up between you two? I mean, we all have our own theories, but none of us really know. Sakura stopped dead in her tracks and became rigid. Then she loosened up and began to walk again. Kiba sighed and closed his eyes. A few seconds later he felt Shino sit down where Sakura had just been. I've tried to have the same conversation with her numerous times. It never goes anywhere. Kiba opened up one eye and looked inquisitively at his lifelong teammate. You actually talk to people? He joked and Shino crossed his arms in annoyance. Man, you're way too uptight, Kiba said as he slapped Shino on the back. As Kiba became serious again, he asked, so what do you think really happened? Shino paused, then turned back to Kiba. They haven't been the same since their last encounter with Sasuke, Shino stated. He then lifted up his mask and turned to Sakura, who was busy making the meal. Somebody turned on the other. Kiba followed Shino's gaze, then sighed. There was no way Naruto would turn on Sakura, but the other way around. He wasn't so sure. A lone swordsman walked alone through the mountain passes. Sleeping when needed, eating when needed, constantly training. He had lived nomadically in this harsh terrain for some while. He had lost track of the exact length of time. He met travelers passing by from time to time. He had heard news of the world outside his self-imposed prison of high altitudes and jagged peaks. Most of the news was regarding the Kyuubi container, and how the Jinchuriki had risen to the top of the ninja world, feared and respected. The lone swordsman slightly smirked. It seemed as if Naruto would realize his dreams. The smirk turned into a half frown as he thought of how his own life was turning out. The last of the Uchiha walked alone through the mountain passes. Anime and manga. Naruto silently began his patrol with Neji. He was in no mood for idle talk, so he had chosen the stoic Hyuga as his partner instead of Kiba. But Naruto didn't always have the best luck, it seemed. Captain. Just Naruto. Captain Naruto. The aggravated blonde sighed. Neji continued. I wish to speak freely. Just talk, Neji. Geez, we've known each other since we were 12. Naruto chuckled. I believe your treatment of Haruno-san has become unacceptable. You are an Anbu captain and you should act as such. Whoa. Naruto wasn't expecting that one. He pulled to a stop on the next branch he landed on. How so? He asked incredulously. She is a team member, and an accomplished medic, she should be treated as such. Naruto sighed again. He had been getting this kind of talk from Kiba for the past few missions that the team had been on. My personal. Neji cut him off. That's exactly it. This is an Anbu team of the village hidden in the leaves. We are not allowed the luxury of personal feelings. Naruto just stared through the eye holes of his mask into the dark ones of Neji's. He couldn't see them, but he felt the stare of those all-seeing eyes. I'll take your thoughts into consideration. Naruto replied in monotone. Go back to camp and help her set up if you like. I'll continue this patrol alone. And then he was gone, not even a puff of smoke, just a flash. Neji just stood there remembering how he had been defeated by that same flash at their first team sparring match. He witnessed Naruto using it to take out many enemies since. But the jutsu was still untraceable, even for the Byakugan. Neji decided to take a slow stroll back to camp instead of running. He just couldn't get why things had turned out between the two like they had. He had his own theory. It was the letting among the 9 outside of the loop. That Sasuke had caused the rift when the 3 of them had their final confrontation. But an outright betrayal of one towards the other didn't seem logical, but then again Sasuke had betrayed them. He then thought about what Kiba was holding when he and Naruto left, a picture of the dead Nin's family. Kiba seemed distraught about it. Neji didn't know what to think, and his family didn't have such things. He also had no girl waiting at home. He wondered what it would be like to have a family more like a regular civilian and not the Hyuga. The only one he could see in that way was Hinata. He smiled to himself. His cousin had become strong. She was a good Jonin instructor, as were the others. They all had a team right now, he thought, but it seemed as if Shikamaru's team would become Chunin soon and he would be given a new cell of 3. The kids that got one of the Konoha 11 always seemed to brag that they had the best sensei, and if any of the 6 that were not sensei were seen in the street they would be followed by awestruck children. Neji finally came upon the camp. Kiba and Shino were resting against Akamaru while Sakura was cooking the meal. He took a place beside her and began to help her with the cooking. A gang of thieves had just gotten one hell of a score. They had destroyed a noble's caravan and took everything that they could get their hands on. They retreated into the nearby mountains to celebrate. They had a huge fire and a big meal. They divided up the treasure and began looking through it all. They had been on a roll lately. Little stood in their way, and the best that the ninja villages threw at them were Chunin with genin support. It was going to be a good summer, and then they could take their spoils and go somewhere warm for the winter. All of a sudden a large bolt of lightning shot through the group. They tried to run, but they were picked off one by one until the leader was the only one left, cowering in the dark. You shouldn't be killing and pillaging in my mountains. The voice was cold. No emotion. The bandit was about to soil himself. It was easy picking. The ninja have bigger things to worry about. He stammered out as the Uchiha's eyes kept penetrating, as if they were telling the bandit that he could not be. Anime and manga. Why? Sasuke was intrigued. What was this threat that had the ninja villages scrambling? He had not gotten any news from the outside world in some time. The sound and the rain are planning something, against the leaf and sand. The rain are weak. Pain is dead. No, they're growing, and there is a strong warrior in the rain that's gaining support. He is said to be the only one to best the great Naruto of the leaf. The last Uchiha, Sasuke Uchiha. Sasuke Uchiha was leading forces in the rain and gaining support from the sound to defeat Naruto. The new information Sasuke had just learned of was intriguing to say the least. He quickly dispatched the bandit leader and turned towards the land of fire. Maybe it was time to pay Konoha a visit. The young captain continued his patrol alone. He tried to push all of Neji's words out of his mind. He had to focus on the task at hand. His newly formed team had been doing these kinds of missions often. They would be sent to an area with high levels of enemy traffic and they would gather information. The tensions in the ninja world had risen lately. Talks of a great war surfaced here and there, talks of well-known shinobi being on the move. The Hokage wasn't telling him everything, she was keeping him shielded, and all he had to go on were the same rumors everybody else heard. Naruto soon finished his patrol, there were no threats in the surrounding area. But Neji's outburst was bugging him. The stoic Hyuga never spoke in such a manner. Maybe he was right though, he was an Anbu captain, responsible for the safety of Konoha and the Hokage. His feelings toward Sakura were not important while on missions. He was relieved that Sakura wore a mask because her face still made him weak in the knees. As he walked back into camp, he decided that duty came first. Kiba was fingering the edges of the photo the nin had on him but quickly hid it when he saw Naruto. What's the good word? Kiba asked. No threats nearby, though I did leave clones in a perimeter just in case. Naruto then slid his mask up and looked Kiba in the eyes. You shouldn't dwell on that picture much, his family knew the risks his job held. I know, but it just gets to me sometimes. I can't turn the emotions off as well as the rest of you. You never could, said Shino. Now I'm getting it from you too, Shino. Kiba asked defensively. I have trouble with it too, Kiba, but I have a duty to the village and the Hokage first. Naruto said, getting Kiba's attention. Then he looked at Neji. So I try to keep them in check, for the team. Neji nodded, understanding the last comment was meant more for him. So what's the agenda for tomorrow? Shino asked. We return to Konoha, the Hokage will want to see this dispatch, and there is no more activity in this area that we can disrupt. Naruto explained. When are we leaving? Kiba asked, knowing he would not like the answer. An hour before sunrise. Naruto stated. Kiba rolled his eyes. Get over it, Kiba. You're getting as lazy as Shikamaru. Neji and Shino smirked at Naruto's comment. That's low, Blondie, Kiba said as he sulked against Akamaru. Food is ready. Came Sakura's call and the four young men suddenly had nothing to talk about, food came first. After the meal, the team readied themselves for sleep and Naruto took the first watch. The young captain could feel the presence of his clones, nothing out of the ordinary happening with them. He let his attention and eyes linger to the pink-haired beauty sleeping a few feet away. The sight of her made his heart catch in his throat, even after all these years. After all they had done to one another. He suddenly found himself next to her, and he was about to reach out and brush her hair back so he could better look at her face. But he recoiled, he shouldn't be doing this, what was she to him? Was she still the girl he loved? What was her life like now? Who were her friends? Was Ino still her best friend? She was a completely different person than the young girl and then teenager that he fell for. Was she also a completely different person than the young woman that betrayed him? She seemed so remorseful, but for some reason, he just couldn't let it go. Her choice had hurt him so much more than he ever thought he could be hurt. He wondered why her betrayal was so painful. Even when Sasuke had betrayed them, he never hurt as much as he did now. He decided he better not think about it too much. They were still on an important mission after all. He turned his attention to the sealed scroll found on the nin Kiba had killed. The dispatch between the Sound and the Rain had been a simple set of orders and supplies needed to be delivered here and troops moved there. Why the Sound had chosen the Rain as an ally was beyond him. In the years since Pain's death and the war, the Rain had limped along, barely surviving. They had no stable leadership, but Naruto knew better than most that hate could fuel a dying animal into taking its enemy down with it. Naruto wondered if the sealed scroll had some new information. The scroll looked innocent enough at a glance, but when Naruto saw the severity of the seal he knew something was up with it. Training with the best had taught him much. The seal was hard, but not impossible, to remove. It took him a little under an hour to dispatch the seal. He slowly unfurled the scroll. And he saw a name he had not spoken or heard for years. A name that lingered in the shadows of his mind. It appeared on the scroll, the words around it melted away. Sasuke. Naruto instantly woke his team and told them to get ready to move. He was barking orders in an almost frantic manner. The highly trained Anbu were quick in packing and soon were heading double time back to Konoha. As they ran, Kiba decided to finally ask the question on everyone's mind. What's wrong, Naruto? Naruto glanced at Sakura then back to Kiba. New information I found in the sealed scroll. What was it? Questioned Neji. Something I need to discuss with the Hokage. Naruto then lowered his head and ran even faster. His team knew he would say no more and quickened their pace to keep up. Sasuke found himself remembering the landmarks around him. He entered a clearing, a large meadow in the middle of the great forest. He was leisurely strolling down a familiar path and getting close to Konoha. He would need a way into the city, but that would be easy enough. He then would have to make his way to the Hokage Tower. He needed to know why his name was coming up in a ninja war. Then he saw a blur coming from the trees about a mile away. Sasuke smirked. He recognized those chakras. Naruto had stopped dead in his tracks. Sakura and the others skidded to a halt behind him. What was he doing? All of this commotion and the hard running, and now he was suddenly stopping only a few miles from Konoha. Naruto, what is it? Sakura asked, but he was looking in the distance. At first she thought he was just ignoring her like usual, but then she saw what he was looking at. A lone figure walking towards them. Everyone, take cover in the trees. He ordered. But Sakura's feet would not budge, her eyes fixated on the man coming nearer. Sakura. She was brought out of her haze by Naruto shouting and shaking her arm. She looked at him, his mask was up, his eyes focused on her. Run. Sasuke walked up to the lone man in the clearing. The others scrambled into the trees. He noted that Naruto had grown. He was taller and his hair was a little longer, matted down by the mask resting on top of his head. Anbu was not what he expected. Sasuke always thought that he would make a great sensei for a young genin team. As he came closer he noticed something else, a captain's insignia on his uniform. His old friend had come a long way. Sasuke now stood a few feet from the blonde. He smirked at the serious look the other man was giving him. Seriousness never looked right on that whiskered face. Hello, Naruto. Sasuke and Naruto stood face to face, the two strongest ninja of their generation, or of any other generation for that matter. Both names feared throughout the world. Sasuke had heard about Naruto's adventures from travelers. He found it funny that the boy that searched for anyone to acknowledge him had the whole world awestruck at the mere mention of his name. Sasuke's eyes moved to the captain's insignia that now adorned Naruto's Anbu uniform. I see you got promoted. Sasuke began. Naruto began to walk further into the field away from the tree line where his team waited. Yes, he replied as Sasuke followed suit and walked beside him. You're separating yourself from your team? Sasuke questioned with a smirk, letting Naruto know he was not unaware of the Anbu in the trees. None of them would really be useful against you, but I'm sensing you're not here for a fight. I find that interesting since you've aligned with the sound and are preparing for an offensive against Konoha. Sasuke smirked again. It seemed news of him apparently being in the rain and getting help from the sound had traveled to the ears of Konoha as well. Actually, I'm on my way to Konoha to find out why it's being said I'm aligned with the rain and the sound. Sasuke found the surprise on Naruto's face to be very satisfying. I wouldn't be surprised if the Hokage stirred this rumor up to end all sympathy that still remained in Konoha. She doesn't even know. It was Sasuke's turn to be surprised. My team just intercepted a communication with your name on it. We didn't even think you were involved in anything up to this point. Sasuke was now further intrigued, and irritated that his name was being used in such a manner. He owed allegiance to nobody. You all in Konoha don't need to worry about this anymore. I'm heading to the rain to destroy this rumor. I will not accept this disgracing of the Uchiha name. Too late for that. You don't really need much help in that department. You screw up your family's name just fine on your own. Naruto said with a sneer. Sasuke gave him a hard look. Naruto gave him one right back. Are you trying to pick a fight with me, Uzumaki? Sasuke wasn't going to take this kind of disrespect from anyone, especially Naruto of all people. Last names. Why so formal? Did I upset the self-righteous last Uchiha? Naruto shot back, his trademark cocky attitude never leaving his voice. Sasuke paused, then turned away. HN. You're not worth my time. Sasuke. Go back to the mountains. Sasuke looked back at Naruto, who was looking away to the tree line where his team waited. Sasuke didn't think anyone from Konoha knew he was living in the mountains. You knew where I was all this time? He asked, still slightly shocked. Yes. I've been keeping tabs on you for some time. I inherited Jiraiya's spy network after all. Naruto turned and faced back to Sasuke. You've been living there in peace, mainly training and meditating. It's been good for you. I can see it. Go home. This is a Konoha matter. I'll inform the Hokage that an impostor is using your name to inspire the sound and the rain against us. Sasuke was shocked, to say the least. Naruto had changed. Their last encounter was only a few years ago. He had been the same impetuous boy from their childhood. What could have changed him so? Then he remembered Sakura. The last time they met, she was there and things hadn't gone smoothly, to say the least. How is she? Sasuke could tell Naruto knew exactly who he was talking about. She's in the trees over there, with Kiba, Shino, and Neji. Sasuke was also surprised Naruto gave the names of his team members and their location so readily. So you two are still on the same team. Comrades till the end. Sasuke let out a small sigh as he, for a split second, wondered how his life would have been. Hardly. Sasuke was now tired of this closed book Naruto. He activated his Sharingan. They were soon in a dark hallway, leaky pipes lining the walls and ceiling. Naruto looked around at the dripping pipes. I used to hate it when you did that, still do. Well, I wasn't getting anything from you out there. Sasuke replied. What's going on with the sound and rain, and why are you so angry with Sakura? Sasuke had not said her name out loud in so long that it was strange to hear it from his lips. The sound and the rain have formed an alliance and are making an offensive against Konoha. The sand has agreed to help us in the matter. The sound is using the anti-Konoha sentiment in the rain from Pain's defeat to gain favor there. And as for my team's medic, you were there. Sasuke stared at the man his old friend had become. Naruto never hated him and he never hated Naruto. Their paths just ended up going separate ways. It took them years to realize this. And although they both came to the same conclusion on their own, it took Naruto much longer than it took Sasuke. As they talked, Sasuke had been searching Naruto's mind. The two hadn't talked to each other in years. You don't hate her, but you no longer speak to her. Sasuke noticed that Naruto was growing agitated. You love her. She chose you and left me to die. Naruto was now yelling. Sasuke always had the upper hand when Naruto was angry. Naruto got sloppy when he got angry. He could now move through Naruto's mind more freely. But you didn't die. Sasuke was close to the information on the sound he needed from Naruto's mind. No thanks to her. I'm done being loyal to people that aren't loyal back. Sasuke didn't miss the obvious swipe at him in the comment. He was going in circles looking for the maps and info on the sound he would need to attack them. You won't find it, Sasuke. Sasuke froze. Naruto knew he was rummaging through his mind the whole time. How strong had Naruto become? Sasuke, out. They were back in the field, sun on their faces. Sasuke giving Naruto a quizzical look. Why let me in if you knew you could kick me out at any moment? Sasuke asked. Kiba can hear this far. Shino has a bug on my shoulder. Neji can read lips. Naruto stated. Keeping things from your team. Doesn't sound like you. Sasuke was now very suspicious of Naruto. He was the same cocky kid with extraordinary abilities, but something in him was broken. Learned from the best. Naruto shot back. After a short pause, he looked over at Sasuke. You want a crack at the rain? Naruto asked. Sasuke gave a simple nod. Then you're coming with us. Where? To Konoha. Team. In a flash, 4 more bodies were in a circle around Sasuke. We are now officially escorting Sasuke Uchiha to Konoha. Sakura was in utter shock. They were traveling with Sasuke back to Konoha. What the hell was going on? They seemed to have a whole conversation in a flash. Then he calls them over and gives the last order she thought she would ever hear. Kiba point. Shino left. Sakura right. Neji on our 6. Naruto ordered, and they began to move. Naruto and Sasuke walked shoulder to shoulder in the middle of the group. The tension was palpable. The other 3 might not have the experiences with Sasuke that she and Naruto had, but they were soldiers of Konoha, and Sasuke was a traitor that almost caused the destruction of their home. They were a powder keg running at high speeds through a forest 10 miles from home. This was bad. With a slight grin, Sasuke looked up at the team. Is this the fastest you can all go? Oh no, Sakura thought to herself. He had to go and say something. Kiba was the first to reply. We were going slow for you, traitor. Didn't want to tire you. We could tie you up and carry you like the criminal you are, if you would prefer. Neji added. Hokage lap dogs beat me. Very unlikely. Was Sasuke's return. Sakura did not know what to do. Naruto could hold his own if this broke out into a fight, but the others would go down fast. And she could only heal, not bring people back from the dead. Quiet, all of you, came Naruto's authoritative voice. Especially you, he said, looking at Sasuke. Sasuke scoffed but stayed quiet. Something was going on. Naruto and Sasuke seemed to be on the same page, but Sakura and the others were miles behind. Naruto had read that scroll and they began to rush back to Konoha. Then they run into Sasuke. And now they were taking him back to Konoha. What the hell was going on? They soon found themselves walking through the gates of Konoha. Sasuke looked up at the huge gates as he walked through. He seemed to have a huge weight put on his shoulders when he passed the threshold into his old home. He looked warily at the people they passed as they walked in. He then looked towards Sakura and she realized she was staring. Their eyes met and he seemed to be questioning her, about what she was not sure. Then he looked over to Naruto and she knew exactly what question he was asking. The guards were in shock. The infamous Sasuke Uchiha was walking through the gates with their top Anbu team. They began to whisper. Naruto silenced them and gave strict orders that they were to not report who walked into the gates just now. But it was too late. The villagers on the crowded street were beginning to notice the individuals standing in their midst. They were murmuring in hushed voices to one another. That's Naruto, and the Uchiha. Kiba, Shino, Neji, Sakura, you're relieved of duty. Go home. I'll call for you when I need you. As Sakura was about to protest, she saw Naruto's eyes through his mask. He was not in the mood. He was obviously trying to get out of there with as little commotion as possible, and her arguing with him was not going to help. She turned to leave, and slowly began to walk through the growing throng. Then in a quiet voice, lower than a whisper, she heard him, I walked him right through those gates. The promise of a lifetime. She quickly turned around to find she was alone in the crowd of chattering people. The rumors of the return of Sasuke Uchiha with the great Naruto Uzumaki had begun to swell and grow. Tsunade was currently meeting with Kakashi and Shikamaru to discuss what to do about the sound and the rain. Kakashi was sitting in a relaxed position while Shikamaru was standing, as usual. Shikamaru was about to say something when the Hokage office door flew open. There stood Naruto and Sasuke. Shikamaru turned around in shock as Kakashi and Tsunade left their seats. Naruto looked at the shocked faces all around and stated, "We need to talk." Anime and manga. After an uncomfortable silence had passed, Naruto looked at the three and said, "We intercepted this communication on our mission." He handed the scroll to Tsunade. Tsunade slowly grabbed it and read it aloud. After she finished reading, Kakashi immediately asked, "So why are you here?" Looking at Sasuke. "We ran into him on our way back." Before Naruto could say anything else, Sasuke immediately interjected, "I've come here to clear my name in connection with the sound." Shikamaru grabbed a cigarette, Tsunade looked at Kakashi, and Kakashi seemed to have no reaction. Or maybe the mask hid his reaction. Before anyone could say anything else, Sasuke immediately said all he needed to say, "I was on my way here to clear my name on my own, but then I ran into Naruto's team. I was promised a crack at the sound. I expect this promise to be kept." Shikamaru dropped his head at how troublesome the situation was becoming while Kakashi and Tsunade looked at each other. It looked as if they might have been mentally communicating. Suddenly the door to the Hokage's office flew open again. This time it was Shizune with some urgent news. "The council has called for a meeting to discuss the return of Sasuke Uchiha." She said it in a voice that showed she understood the delicacy of the situation, but Tsunade was still annoyed. She looked over to Kakashi and said, "We have to handle this very carefully." "I know." Tsunade turned to Shikamaru and said, "Take Naruto and Sasuke somewhere they won't be seen until this meeting is over." Shikamaru nodded, then Tsunade and Kakashi left. Naruto and Sasuke followed him until they reached a small empty room with nothing but a table and a few chairs. It had a window that overlooked the whole village and it looked like it had picked up some dust from not being used in a long time. Shikamaru simply stated, "I have to listen in on these meetings due to my position. You guys stay here until I get back." He quietly left the room and thought to himself, "This is gonna be a major drag." Anime and manga. Sasuke looked over at Naruto and noticed that, on the outside, he looked cool, calm and collected. However, he could see in his eyes that he was broken, hurting, and suffering. He thought Naruto had it all, but now that he was right in front of him, he could see that Naruto wasn't anywhere near what he pictured he would be. Intrigued, he asked, "What do you want, Naruto?" "Some peace and quiet." Sasuke showed an amused grin at Naruto's attempt to shut down conversation. "You know, I thought you had it all. You were the hero in the war, you're one of the most powerful shinobi to ever exist, you're respected all over the shinobi world, but somehow, you've found a way not to be happy. How are you doing that?" Naruto slightly lifted his head and said in a monotone voice, "You know, you didn't used to be the talkative type. I usually didn't have to talk to you to know what you were thinking. Why do you care what I'm thinking?" Sasuke looked at Naruto for a few seconds before answering. "We may have gone down different paths, but we're far from enemies." Naruto didn't answer. He just walked over to the small window looking over the village and stood there. "Don't make me use my Sharingan again." "Good idea. It helped you out so much last time." Sasuke could see he wasn't getting anywhere. He needed something that would help him get the information he wanted from Naruto. After a few seconds of thinking, he turned to Naruto. "Do you remember that time you pranked Kakashi with that eraser?" Naruto sighed and replied, "Yeah, what about it?" He was trying to hide the interest in his voice, but Sasuke noticed it anyway. "Did you know he didn't actually fall for it?" Naruto did a 180 as he turned to Sasuke. "What?" Naruto looked a little bit like that young genin he used to be for 2 seconds before regaining his composure. Then he looked slightly suspicious and scrunched his eyes together. "How do you know?" I asked him. When I was younger, I thought it was strange that a jonin would fall for a prank like that, so sometime after the Chunin exams I asked him about it. He basically said it was his way of analyzing us." Naruto put his hand on his chin as he was thinking. Then a slight frown crept up to his face as he realized Sasuke was probably telling the truth. Oh well, I shouldn't be surprised. He was a Jonin after all. And just like that, he was back to being that apathetic Anbu once again. Sasuke decided to finally go for a straight-up confrontation. Naruto, do you know why what Sakura did hurt you so much? Naruto turned and in a sarcastic but monotone voice replied, please enlighten me. Did you ever think that maybe it was because of how much you loved her? Language resources. Naruto was silent. He had tried not to think too much about Sakura, but now Sasuke was directly confronting him on the subject. Think about it, Naruto. I betrayed you as well, but you can still talk to me. You can still look at me, and I didn't even come back to the village. That's different. Not really. I tried to kill you and failed. Naruto turned around and in a sarcastic voice said, are your meditations in the mountains the cause for this outpouring of wisdom? Sasuke looked at him and said in a plain voice, no, it's experience. Sasuke noticed he now had Naruto's full attention. You know about the slaughtering of the Uchiha. You also know that it was my own brother, Itachi, who was responsible. I had to watch my parents die at the hands of my brother. I lived with that hate for Itachi almost my whole life. You saw it. Naruto's head dropped slightly. Now that we know why he did what he did, all that hatred, all that rage, all that anger, was for nothing. Naruto looked at Sasuke and noticed that for once the Uchiha was opening up to somebody. Naruto looked at Sasuke with a seriousness in his eyes and said, why are you telling me this? Sasuke simply replied, because I think you're about to do something similar. What Sakura did was wrong, but you're the one stuck living with your hatred. I could tell just by looking at her that she was remorseful for what she had done, but I'm guessing you haven't really given her a chance to mend things. Naruto kept his head bowed, feeling a little guilty. Look, Naruto, I'm not saying to just forget what happened and act like everything is fine between you guys. I'm just saying to at least try. You obviously still care about her because you remembered the promise you made her when you were kids. Naruto raised his eyebrows in slight shock. He knew Sasuke was by him when he whispered at Sakura, but he thought he had whispered low enough for him not to hear. I just don't want you to end up fixing things with Sakura 10 years from now and then get stuck thinking about all the time you lost. Like you. Sasuke looked at Naruto and noticed that he wasn't trying to hurt him but was instead empathizing with him and understood what he was going through. After a few minutes of silence, Naruto looked back at Sasuke. He spoke in a soft voice, you know, I'm pretty sure Konoha would love to have you back, sounding slightly hopeful. Sasuke let out a slight grin, at least you're starting to sound like yourself again. Naruto let out a slight grin. As he stood at the window, he noticed the training grounds, then turned to Sasuke. All this waiting is getting boring, I'm heading to the training grounds. Then Naruto looked at Sasuke and with a very visible grin held out his hand towards Sasuke, showing one half of the unison sign. You in? Sasuke turned and looked at the outstretched arm. He was curious to see how strong Naruto had gotten, so there was no way he was turning down the offer. Without breathing a word, he accepted the unison sign with a slight grin since he knew Naruto wanted to see how strong he had gotten as well. The two left the room and headed for the training grounds. The council meeting was not going well. The council, with the exception of Tsunade, Kakashi and one other member, was trying to confine Sasuke to the village. He had received a full pardon because of his actions in the war, but since he hadn't returned to Konoha, he was still considered by some to be a rogue ninja. As tensions rose, Kakashi tried to stay rational. This idea that we can confine Sasuke to the village is unreasonable. What would he even do while he was here? A random councilman blurted out, I don't care if he has to sit out in the fields gathering weeds. If we let him out of our sight, he's too much of a threat. Tsunade saw this meeting was going nowhere fast and decided to speak up. The biggest problem with what you all are suggesting is the fact that if we confine Sasuke to the village, we'd also have to confine Naruto to the village. If Sasuke turned on us without Naruto here, no one would be able to stop him. The same councilman from before replied, couldn't we just put a seal on him? Kakashi simply answered, on what grounds? He came here willingly. He was pardoned for all his actions due to his assistance in the war efforts, and even if we did seal him, he might be too powerful for any seal to contain. It's obvious he hasn't stopped training. There was a moment of silence as the council members started running out of reasons to confine Sasuke to the village. Tsunade and Kakashi were making progress. Naruto and Sasuke were standing on training ground 6. They were standing about 100 feet from each other as the water from the lake splashed against their feet. Naruto looked across the lake and half yelled, same rules as our sparring matches when we were kids. Also, no flashy techniques. We don't need the attention. Agreed. Naruto looked across the lake and said to Sasuke, give me a second, with a slight smirk. Naruto entered the chamber where Kurama resided. I know I haven't used your power in a while because I haven't really needed to, but this is Sasuke, so if we don't work together we'll probably both get humiliated, he said while rubbing the back of his head and sporting an uncomfortable smile. That's the first real smile I've seen in years. If this will help you go back to being the regular Naruto, then I'll help. Naruto was taken aback. He knew that he and Kurama no longer talked as much, but he had no idea that Kurama actually cared about how he acted. He turned to Kurama and with a wide smile said, so you did like me before. I just thought it was interesting to watch you. Naruto looked at Kurama quizzically. What do you mean? I mean that the village hated you and ostracized you. Then your best friend turned on you, but despite all that, you never broke or cracked. You were an anomaly. You always had this positive attitude, no matter what the circumstances. It was quite interesting to watch. But what was more interesting was watching what, or rather who, finally broke you. Naruto let his head slightly drop as he pondered Kurama's words. Suddenly Kurama turned from Naruto and was extremely alert. Sasuke's coming. Naruto left Kurama and found himself on the receiving end of a fist coming straight at him. He quickly used his forearm to block the incoming blow. Your second is over. Naruto grinned and activated his Kyuubi Chakra mode, KCM. Sasuke activated his Sharingan and in a flash the lake was no longer still. Waves rolled over each other as the two shinobi were suddenly dealing a variety punches and blows. Naruto tried to start a taijutsu barrage, but Sasuke's Sharingan was too good for that. Naruto threw two punches that were easily dodged, then tried to surprise Sasuke with a third Kyuubi arm sprouting out of his back. He planned on making the arm go over his head so that he could attack from above. As Sasuke saw the third arm overhead, he sidestepped and landed a swift blow to Naruto's core. As Naruto reeled back to catch his breath, Sasuke pulled out his sword and began to attack, quickly changing his fighting style to keep Naruto off balance. He sliced in the general direction of Naruto's head. Naruto dodged and lost a few golden locks to Sasuke's sharp blade. Naruto used arm extensions of Kyuubi to block the blows, but it was proving more and more difficult. Naruto was stuck on the defensive, so he decided to create some distance between him and Sasuke. He manipulated the chakra in his feet and pushed himself a reasonable distance across the lake. It was apparent that Sasuke's movements were quicker and much more precise than when they last met. Naruto didn't think that was possible, but it was just proof that Sasuke had definitely been training these past few years. Kakashi had sensed when Naruto entered KCM and started fighting Sasuke. He snuck a glance at Shikamaru, who simply thought to himself, this is already turning into a major drag. Tsunade had noticed as well but tried to keep her composure to avoid stirring up the council. Sakura was walking back towards her apartment. She was reaching for the complex door when she noticed a faint orange glow over one of the training grounds. She knew she was ordered to stay put until Naruto called for the team, but she was determined to find out what was going on. As a member of Team 7, she had a right to know. She was already hopping across the roofs of Konoha with a million thoughts racing through her head. What was going on? Why was Naruto being so secretive? Why was Sasuke here? Why did it seem like Naruto and Sasuke were already on the same page? She felt like her head was about to explode and decided that the only way she'd get some answers was if she got them on her own. Naruto decided it was time to go on the offensive. Shadow Clone Jutsu. Around 20 shadow clones popped up all around the two. Sasuke smirked and said, "Still using that jutsu, huh?" Naruto grinned and started a taijutsu barrage with the recently formed shadow clones. Sasuke used his Sharingan to avoid most of the attacks as he dispatched the shadow clones one by one. He was able to dodge most of the attacks but got caught with a punch to the jaw at the very end. As he flew back and caught his footing, Naruto immediately launched a barrage of shuriken and kunai. He was hoping to sneak in a kunai with a tag on it to go in for the finishing blow with his flying Raijin technique. And it would have worked, if Sasuke didn't have a Sharingan. As Sasuke weaved through the shuriken and kunai, he noticed a tag similar to the one Minato used in the war. He immediately realized what Naruto was planning, but even with his enhanced reflexes, Naruto was on top of him faster than he thought he would be. Naruto was just about to grab Sasuke and finish the fight, but right before he could touch him, Sasuke quickly pushed out his hands, almighty push. A huge shockwave suddenly blasted back Naruto and caused a mini earthquake. Naruto had just been within inches of winning the fight, but now he was sky high, having been blown away by the abilities of Sasuke's Rinnegan. As Naruto steadied himself in the air, he noticed that Sasuke was the first person to successfully counter his flying Raijin technique. He let out a slight grin as he noticed he could finally let loose a little. It was as if Sasuke was reading his mind and thinking the same thing because he wore a similar grin. Tsunade and Kakashi had been successfully persuading the council to lean their way, but then it felt like a mini earthquake hit. Kakashi sighed and closed his eyes. Shikamaru put his head down and Tsunade was visibly annoyed. Konoha wasn't known for earthquakes, so a councilwoman turned to look out the window. "What is going on out there?" Exclamation mark quote. As she looked out, she saw a small orange light floating above one of the training grounds along with the silhouette of a man standing on the water. My, I do believe there's a fight going on between the Kyuubi and the Uchiha. The councilman from before immediately ran to the window. As soon as he saw it with his own eyes, he yelled out, "See! I told you the Uchiha couldn't be trusted. He's already started a fight with our strongest shinobi." Tsunade, Kakashi and Shikamaru all looked at each other as their faces filled with exasperation. Sakura had just arrived at the training ground and was surprised to find Neji, Kiba and Shino already there. She looked at Naruto, who was now floating high above the water, and Sasuke, who was standing on the water. Upon looking closely at the two figures, she noted that they actually seemed to be in good spirits. She now had more questions than she did when she had originally started to journey towards the training grounds. What had started this fight? Why were Naruto and Sasuke already fighting within an hour of his arrival? Was it a serious fight or some friendly sparring? And if it was a friendly sparring match, how were they already on such good terms? As her mind bombarded her with questions, her thought process was interrupted by a sudden shout. Susanoo! Suddenly an incomplete Susanoo formed around Sasuke. The Susanoo was the same distinct purple color. It consisted of a ribcage and an arm that hung over Sasuke. After the Susanoo had fully materialized, Sasuke flew straight up towards Naruto. As Naruto charged back towards him, Sasuke flung his hand out and yelled, "Chidori!" Suddenly his hand was filled with a dark lightning. Naruto replied by flinging his hand behind him and yelling, "Rasengan!" The Rasengan was fully formed within a second. Neji looked over to everyone who was standing around him. This is getting out of hand. Shino kept his eyes on the fight, but replied, we know, but none of us could even come close to stopping them. Sasuke and Naruto were getting closer and closer to colliding, but right before they collided they heard a loud shout. Kamui. Both shinobis came to a dead halt as the area they were about to clash into started twisting and distorting into a different space-time. Sasuke and Naruto diffused their attacks, then turned to look down at the obvious culprit. There stood Kakashi, with his Mangekyo Sharingan on display. Beside him stood Tsunade, Shikamaru and the council. Naruto and Sasuke then turned and noticed that Naruto's team had been watching the fight from the other side of the lake. Sasuke looked at Naruto with a blank stare and Naruto automatically knew what he was thinking. Their sparring session was officially over. Kakashi and the others watched as Naruto and Sasuke slowly descended from the sky. When they finally landed on the water, Naruto's KCM disappeared and Sasuke's Susanoo disappeared. Tsunade started charging forward to start yelling when Kakashi held out his hand stopping her. He looked at the two shinobi and asked them plainly, what's going on here? The councilman made sure to say his piece before Naruto and Sasuke could say anything. Isn't it obvious? The Uchiha is already causing trouble within his first hour of being here. Naruto immediately stepped forward, you're wrong. This was my idea. The councilman who originally made the accusations was very visibly shocked. The rest of the council was very visibly shocked as well, with Kakashi being the only exception. The Konoha nin were visibly shocked, although not to the same extent. It was at this point that Sakura started putting the pieces together. She thought to herself, it looks like this may have been a friendly sparring match, but how are they already on such good terms? Maybe it wasn't necessarily a friendly sparring session but just a sparring session to gauge their abilities. Kakashi studied Naruto for a few seconds, then Sasuke, then turned back to Naruto, explain. Naruto stared into space trying to quickly think of a diplomatic way of saying he was bored waiting, but nothing came to mind. He started hesitantly with a hand behind his head, well, we were waiting for you guys to come to a decision, and there wasn't much to do, so we decided to spar out here to kill the time. The way he said it made it sound like he didn't believe it himself. There was a moment of silence as Kakashi looked at the two. He thought to himself, Sasuke is back for less than an hour and Naruto is already going back to being his old self. Interesting. Kakashi looked over at Naruto. Naruto, you're physically the most powerful member of the Anbu. You know that your strength must not only be physical, but mental. If you can't wait less than an hour for a decision to be made, that says something about the strength of your mind. Naruto put his head down and looked properly chastised. Before Kakashi could say anything else, Sasuke broke into the conversation. Has the council come to a decision regarding my fate? He said with a sarcastic flair. Kakashi looked at Tsunade and Tsunade looked at the rest of the council. After a few moments of silence, Tsunade spoke up, the council hasn't yet come to a decision. The main issue being discussed is your confinement to Konoha. Naruto and his team on the other side of the lake couldn't hide their shock at the statement. Sasuke's expression, however, stayed the same. He looked directly at the council members with his piercing eyes. What do you guys expect me to do if I'm confined to Konoha? Sit here twiddling my thumbs. Kakashi glanced at the councilman. The exact words used were gathering weeds. Naruto let out a stifled giggle as he imagined Sasuke gathering weeds. In a painfully monotone voice, Sasuke stated, I was promised a shot at the sound. If that offer no longer stands, I'm leaving. I'll take my shot at them alone. The councilman turned to Sasuke, if you leave, we'll have no way to confirm you aren't working with the sound. That's your problem. There was a very long silence at his statement and the tension could be felt in the air. Sasuke looked around at everyone present, this isn't going anywhere. I'm leaving. A Susanoo appeared around Sasuke, but this time, it was the complete Susanoo. The members of the council immediately turned towards Naruto almost as if to say he should try to stop him. Naruto looked at them, then at Sasuke. Much to his surprise, Sasuke was already staring at him, almost as if he was wondering what Naruto would do as well. After a few seconds of thought, he turned to the council. I'm the one who promised Sasuke Uchiha a shot at the sound. If that promise won't be kept, I'm not gonna try to stop him from leaving. My suggestion is for the council to allow Sasuke the freedom to participate in any and all missions concerning the sound. Not only would he be a valuable asset in the field, he also has my complete trust. The members of the council expressed their shock by very audibly moaning and grumbling to each other. Tsunade looked at Kakashi to see what his reaction was to this. His face was expressionless, but somehow pensive. Discover more. Standardized and admissions tests. How to. D and expert content. Crafts. Martial arts films. Educational resources. State and local government. Anime. Anime and manga. Language resources. Desserts. Kiba turned to the rest of the group and almost yelled, "Are you kidding me?" Shino simply said in a hushed voice, "Quiet." Sakura wondered what had happened between the two to cause whatever this was. They almost looked like they were friends with a common goal. But they were barely on speaking terms a few hours ago. She half smiled at the sight of two members of Team 7 on such good terms. Unfortunately, the smile didn't last long. It slowly turned into a frown as she felt a pang of hurt and guilt as she thought about why she wasn't close to Naruto as well. Kakashi finally left his pensive state and turned towards the council. I have a proposal. After a short pause he began, Sasuke Uchiha will not be confined to the village. However, he will be required to stay within a reasonable distance of Naruto Uzumaki at all times. From living in Konoha, to going on missions and everything in between. Naruto is the only shinobi powerful enough to prevent any damage from occurring in the case of a betrayal. What do you all say to this? The members of the council paused then began to talk amongst themselves. After a few minutes, Tsunade turned to Kakashi and said, the council wishes to define a reasonable distance as being in eyesight. If that is the definition of a reasonable distance, the council accepts these terms. All eyes were now on Sasuke as Kakashi turned to him. Sasuke Uchiha, do you accept these terms? Sasuke's Susanoo slowly unwrapped from around his body. When it had completely disappeared, he looked at Kakashi. I accept the terms. Kakashi and Tsunade looked at each other. They understood they had just dodged a serious bullet. Kakashi now turned back to Sasuke. Then it's settled. You'll be staying with Naruto until your next mission. Sasuke looked over at Naruto and gave a curt nod of acknowledgement. Naruto returned the favor. Kakashi saw no one was moving even although everything had been settled. He turned to Tsunade and whispered into her ear, dismiss the council. Tsunade nodded and stepped forward towards the council. The council is dismissed. The council members understood what was really being said and dispersed rather quickly. Naruto saw his team waiting on the other side of the lake and decided they had a right to know what was going on. He started walking over to them, then stopped and motioned for Sasuke to follow him. Eyes distance, remember? He said with a slight grin. Sasuke grunted and reluctantly started following him to the other end of the lake. As Naruto and Sasuke got closer to the team, 1,000 thoughts started racing through Sakura's head. She was about to stand face to face with Naruto and the man she betrayed him for. What were they coming to say? Why were they already possibly on such good terms? How would the team respond? How would she respond? She could feel her throat start to tighten up as Naruto and Sasuke reached where they were standing on the other side of the lake. Naruto and Sasuke stopped a few feet from the team, then Naruto looked at the team. As I'm sure you guys just heard, Sasuke is going to be a member of this team until we figure out what's going on between the sound and the rain. Until then, I expect Sasuke to be treated like any other member of this team. We don't have any intel we can actually act on, so for now we don't have any missions. However, there will be a training session tomorrow at 6 a.m. Understood. Everyone gave a silent nod of understanding, everyone except Sakura. Naruto noticed she looked slightly detached from the situation, then he remembered how he had excluded her from the previous training session and felt a slight pang of guilt. He avoided looking at Sakura but stated clearly, I expect everyone to be present tomorrow. We need to start working on our coordination as a team. As soon as he said that, Sakura turned and glanced his way as a slight blush crept onto her face. Naruto was very purposefully not looking her way. Was Naruto making her feel included? If he was it professional or personal? Sakura decided she didn't care and that she would just enjoy this small victory. Naruto was watching her reaction out of the corner of his eye and felt a little better due to her positive reaction. Naruto looked at the team, we're done here. Neji, Kiba and Shino gave a curt nod and left. Sakura stayed behind as if she had more questions. Naruto looked in her direction, were you going to say something? The blunt question caught Sakura off guard. She looked up to see Naruto and Sasuke, both staring at her and waiting for a response. She had so many questions but now she couldn't think of any. Her mind went completely blank and she just froze. After a few seconds, Sasuke turned to Naruto. Naruto looked like he was drawing a blank as well. He wasn't used to Naruto being left speechless and he had to admit it was interesting to see. He noticed the lagging silence surrounding the three and finally spoke up. You know, I'm pretty sure I could sneak away right now and you wouldn't notice. That seemed to knock Naruto out of his trance. Naruto realized he was staring at the ground and quickly looked up. Sasuke was standing there slightly shaking his head. Naruto scrunched his eyes at him and cleared his throat. Well, I was thinking about going to Ichiraku's. He turned to Sakura. After a short pause, he looked at Sakura and managed to mutter out, if you want, you can come. He looked over at Sasuke, you don't have a choice, Tem. Sasuke rolled his eyes as he said, some things never change. Naruto slightly grinned as he and Sasuke started walking away. Naruto looked behind them and noticed that Sakura wasn't moving. You coming? Sakura was in a slight daze but managed to stutter out a, yes. Kakashi and Tsunade had been watching the interaction from the other side of the lake. They didn't know what was said, but they did see all three members of Team 7 walking towards the village. Tsunade turned to Kakashi, is it just me, or do Naruto and Sasuke almost look like they used to when they were kids? Kakashi was covering his Sharingan as he turned to answer, no. There's definitely a familiarity between the two. Kakashi started pensively looking out over the lake. Shikamaru noticed that Kakashi was thinking way harder than he usually did. What are you thinking? Kakashi turned to Shikamaru and Tsunade. When I first saw Sasuke standing with Naruto at the office door, I thought he was going to cause nothing but trouble for the village. Shikamaru looked at Kakashi, he might still cause nothing but trouble for the village. Maybe, but I think he could possibly have an overall positive impact while he's here. Tsunade put a hand on her chin, you're talking about Naruto. Yes. Sasuke has only been here a little over an hour and Naruto is acting somewhat rashly, like he used to. He turned to Tsunade, you assigning Sakura to Naruto's team was a brilliant move, but now that Sasuke's on the team there's no telling what may happen. Shikamaru paused for a few seconds before replying to Kakashi, Kakashi, as much as I want Sasuke to help Naruto and Sakura, we have to remember not to be too optimistic. If Sasuke's intentions are good, he may end up helping Naruto and Sakura. But what if he has bad intentions? Or no intentions like he usually does? At best, he could bring Naruto and Sakura back together. At worst, he could tear them even further apart than they are now. After a long pause, Kakashi looked out over the water again and said in a faint whisper, only time will tell. The sun was setting as Naruto, Sasuke and Sakura walked through the village at a casual pace. The three noticed they were starting to draw attention to themselves. Random villagers were now casting glances at them and whispering amongst themselves, "Those are the three original members of Team 7. It was a little too late to try to be inconspicuous, so the three decided to just speed up their pace." Choji, Ino and Hinata were eating at a tempura restaurant when they noticed the three walk by briskly. Choji stopped short of taking a bite. "Whoa. I heard he was back, but I didn't expect to see that." Ino was still in shock. "I don't even know what that was." She turned to Choji. "You think they're all back on good terms?" Hinata interrupted in a silent but firm voice. "No, I know Naruto. If they were all on good terms, he'd be smiling, or laughing. He looked like he didn't really know what to do with them by his side. Like he didn't know what to say." Choji paused, then turned to Ino. "She's right. I still remember what they used to be like. There's no way they're all on good terms." Ino gave an understanding nod. Maybe she would talk to Sakura later to get more information. Naruto, Sasuke and Sakura finally arrived at Ichiraku and sat down. Tsuki and Ayame were in the kitchen preparing a new batch of noodles. Ayame heard the customers sit down and rushed to finish her batch. After a few seconds, she rushed out of the kitchen with a smile. "What can I get you guys?" Then she noticed that it was all three members of the former Team 7 who were sitting at the bar. "Dad, I think you'll want to see this." "What is it, Ayame?" Tsuki inquisitively peeked out of the kitchen. An expression of shock crossed his face before he regained his composure. He knew that tensions were probably running high, so he wanted to help them relax a bit. Remembering old times, huh? Naruto took his Anbu mask off and placed it on the bar, then he looked at the broken team before replying, "More like we needed to talk, but in any case, you know what we usually order." He managed a slight smile and Tsuki noted he was actually trying to be somewhat sociable. He had witnessed the change in Naruto after the war and was hoping that he'd one day see that kid who just really enjoyed eating his ramen. He smiled at the fond memories, then turned to Naruto. "You got it, boss." As the ramen was being prepared, there was an awkward silence between the three. Sakura was now a lot more cool-headed and had a lot of questions, but she didn't want to immediately start pressing the two for information, so she resolved to try to start some light conversation. She turned to Sasuke. "So, how are the mountains?" "Rocky." Sakura slightly rolled her eyes then sighed as she thought about how hopeless her situation was. She wanted to talk to the two shinobi, but she wasn't on speaking terms with one, and the other one wouldn't even hold a conversation. Then she heard something she hadn't heard in a long time. Naruto was giggling to himself. He had been so serious and grave the past few years, but now she saw a small sliver of his old self. Sasuke turned to Naruto. "What's so funny?" Naruto still wore a slight smile as he looked at Sasuke. "I forgot about how you used to answer questions with one word." Sasuke grunted and turned back to look at some condiments on the bar. Sakura gave an affectionate smile as she savored the sight of a little bit of the old Naruto. Naruto noticed she was looking and turned to her. She had no idea what to do. Her cheeks suddenly turned a light shade of pink as Naruto and her were now looking directly at each other. After a second of looking into those blue eyes of his, she saw that his eyes weren't the vibrant blue they used to be. They were a pale, light blue. He looked like a man hardened by life. She didn't see the anger and rage she had been seeing the past few years, she just saw raw pain. She immediately wished she hadn't looked into his eyes and looked away. She always thought that Naruto was so strong, that he could bounce back from anything, but in that moment she saw that somehow, some way she had deeply scarred him. Her betrayal was the one thing he couldn't take. It broke him, possibly beyond repair. Naruto slowly turned away. There wasn't much to look at, so he just looked down at his fox-shaped Anbu mask. After a few minutes of silence between the three, Ayame came out of the kitchen. "Dinner is served." The three nin expressed their thanks. said Grace and started eating. Sasuke finished first and noticed that Naruto was eating with less enthusiasm than he used to. It's almost disturbing to see you eating like a normal human being. Thank the Anbu. Sasuke gave him a short glance and turned away to look at the condiments again. Sakura watched as Naruto slowly ate the ramen. She knew he was using the Anbu as an excuse. The real reason he was eating with so little enthusiasm was because of the pain she had caused him. Did you come here with us just to ask me about the mountains? Sakura got knocked out of her thought process and saw Sasuke giving her a blank stare as he waited for an answer. She was caught off guard, again. She decided she better take a deep breath and try to ask the best question she could think of. It was as if all the questions she had been thinking about spilled out at once. What exactly is going on here? What's all this business with the sound? And what does it have to do with you? Naruto and Sasuke looked at each other. Then, after a short pause, Naruto put down his chopsticks and turned to Sakura. The scroll we intercepted on our mission ended up containing crucial information. It was a communication between the sound and the rain. But it wasn't any communication, it was a communication confirming a future offensive against the leaf and possibly the sand. Sakura's eyes widened at the news. In the communication, the rain's new leader was declared to be Sasuke. Sakura started leaning closer in after that. Her shock was apparent. When we ran into Sasuke, he was on his way to try to clear his name. He claims he has nothing to do with this alliance. I'm filling the team in tomorrow at the training session. After sitting there in stunned silence for a few seconds, Sakura thought about another question she had wanted to ask. A more personal one. She wanted to know the real reason they were fighting, not the cover-up they had gave the council. She wasn't sure how they would respond, so she asked in a rather silent voice, "What were you guys doing fighting each other?" Sasuke turned to her. "Weren't you at the training ground when Naruto was talking to Kakashi?" Sakura looked down and muttered out a silent, "Yes." She knew that he knew what she was really asking and he wasn't going to give an answer. Just then, Naruto finished his bowl of ramen. He stood up, picked up his Anbu mask that was on the bar, and turned to his former teammates. In that same monotone voice he had grown accustomed to, he simply said, "I think we're done here." Sasuke stood up as well. Sakura just sat there with her head slightly down. Naruto looked over to Sakura. "See you tomorrow." There was no mistaking it, he was being strictly professional. His voice was too monotone to be anything else. As he and Sasuke walked away, she found herself almost wishing he hadn't said anything at all. She sat there alone at the bar for a couple of minutes before slowly walking away towards her apartment. Ayame looked at Sakura as she left the bar, then whispered to Tsuki, "They're broken, Dad. Give it time, Ayame. Give it time." Naruto unlocked his front door, then motioned for Sasuke to walk in. As he turned on the lights, he noticed Sasuke examining the place. "You haven't changed much around here." Naruto was now taking off his Anbu gear. Not much reason to. After all his gear was off, he started heading towards his room but noticed Sasuke was watching him like a hawk. It felt as if Sasuke's eyes weren't looking only at his physical body but rather into his soul. He thought Sasuke would turn away after he got caught staring, but he just kept staring anyway. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Sasuke turned to him and in a serious voice stated, "The longer you take to fix things, the more it's gonna hurt." Naruto was taken aback but tried not to show it. He turned to Sasuke and said in the same monotone voice, "I never thought I'd be getting relationship advice from you of all people." Sasuke made sure to avoid his attempt at staying away from the topic of Sakura. "I saw you guys at Ichiraku's." Naruto paused for a few moments and then turned to Sasuke, "If you need a change of clothes, you can get some from the drawer in my room. I'm going to take a shower." Another Sakura dodge. As Naruto started walking towards his bathroom, Sasuke started walking towards the apartment door. "Where do you think you're going?" Sasuke replied in a monotone voice that matched the one Naruto had grown accustomed to. To get some air. The air in here is pretty stale. Naruto scrunched his eyes in anger, but before he could say anything, Sasuke cut him off. Naruto, you and I both know I have no intention of leaving the village, and if I don't want to be seen, I won't be seen. Naruto paused for 2 seconds, crossed his arms, and replied with a very sharp and curt, "Fine," then turned around and slammed the door as he went into the bathroom. Sasuke simply opened the door and walked out of Naruto's apartment. Sasuke was in no rush to get to where he was going, but he moved swiftly and silently through the rooftops to make sure he wasn't seen. Sakura had just finished taking a shower. She had on a flowery kimono and was drying her hair with a towel when she heard a knock at her door. She reached for the handle and pulled the door slightly open. She couldn't hide her shock as she saw Sasuke Uchiha standing in her doorway. Her mind started racing again. Why is he here? How is he here without Naruto? Does Naruto know he's here? Before she could think of any more questions, she heard Sasuke say in a firm voice, "We need to talk." She looked at that serious face and those piercing eyes of his before motioning for him to come in. She looked at him and in a soft voice said, "If you want, you can sit down." Motioning to a chair on the kitchen table. "I'll stand." She felt a little annoyed at his response. He had come to her house, not the other way around. The least he could do was show some manners. She remembered who was standing in her kitchen and felt some of the anger dissipate. She knew it wasn't personal. He always acted this way. She turned to him and said in a firm voice, "Where is Naruto?" By now, probably getting out of the shower. She felt her cheeks start turning pink at the thought and turned away to some leftover tea that was sitting on the stove. Sasuke kept his usual blank stare although he noticed what had happened. After she regained her composure, she turned to him. "What does that mean?" "It means that when I left, he was about to take a shower." Sakura's shoulders dropped at how basic his answers were. She needed to figure out why he was here. She sat down and said in a slightly exasperated voice, "Why are you here, Sasuke?" "To ask some questions, mainly about Naruto." Sakura was slightly shocked, but then she thought to herself, "I should have known." She lowered her head a little then softly stated, "So you're here about Naruto?" "Yes." She looked slightly dejected as she thought about the fact that she had hurt Naruto so bad that Sasuke was getting involved. Sasuke was studying her expression but decided he better move the conversation along quickly. He was supposed to be with Naruto after all. How bad is it? Sakura kept her head slightly bowed, then after a long pause, she responded. "After you guys fought, we came back to Konoha and he stopped talking to me. I tried to apologize, but I didn't really know what to say. The best I could come up with was, 'I'm sorry.'" She was trying to avoid looking at Sasuke. "I thought maybe he'd just forgive me and forget about it. I tried to joke around with him, like I usually did." After a short pause she continued, "He wouldn't respond though. I stopped trying when one day I was going to give him a playful punch, like old times. He caught it. I never forgot that look in his eyes. It was a look that said we weren't friends anymore." Her eyes slowly started watering. "He hasn't said a word to me these past 3 years." Quote. For the first time in her life, Sakura saw Sasuke's face fill with pure shock as he realized the situation was far worse than he thought. As tears started running down her face, she started talking through the crying. "The last time he talked to me was yesterday. I grabbed his hand while we were outside the Hokage's office." She started full on crying as she yelled out her next sentence. "Do you know what he called me? Haruno-san." As she continued to sob, she said it again, but in a hushed voice, "Haruno-san." Sasuke just stood there as she was crying. He never really knew what to do in these situations, but he noticed a box of tissues on her kitchen table. He grabbed it then knelt down next to her holding out the tissues. She looked slightly surprised but graciously accepted them. Sasuke finally pulled out the chair next to her and sat down. His voice was soft and full of understanding. Sakura, have you ever thought about why Naruto was, and is still, so cold with you? I mean, really thought about it. She responded in a silent and noticeably detached voice, maybe because I betrayed him after all he did for me. Sasuke sighed then replied, or maybe it's because of how much he still loves you. Sakura kept her head bowed. He doesn't love me. Yes, he does. Sasuke watched as Sakura kept coldly staring at the kitchen table. He could tell she wasn't buying it. He paused for a little then spoke up. You remember when Naruto and I were talking out in the open while you and the rest of the team were hiding in the trees? Sakura gave a simple, slow nod. We discussed more than the mission. Sakura didn't move, but he could tell she was paying attention. I used my Sharingan. Sakura's head quickly spun around as she began to intently look at Sasuke. We had a whole other conversation, about you. Now Sakura was looking at him hard enough to burn a hole through him. After a short pause, Sasuke smiled as he started talking. He doesn't hate you, Sakura. When I used my Sharingan, I was searching for answers about this business between the sound and the rain. I stumbled onto the brightest point in his mind, and it was you. He still loves you. Sakura's looked down as her eyes started watering again. The reason he's treated you the way he's treated you is because of that exact reason. It's because he loved you so much that, when you betrayed him, it hurt him way more than it would if anyone else did. Including me. It's proof that you matter to him, Sakura. To be honest, you matter to him a lot. Sakura could feel the hot tears running down her face again as she started sniffling. How could Naruto still love her? When he needed her the most, she had betrayed him. But somehow, he still loved her. Sasuke decided he had better get going. He had said all that he needed to say. The main question he wanted an answer to had been answered and Sakura looked like she needed to be alone. He let out a small sigh as he stood up. Goodbye, Sakura. He started walking towards the door when he heard Sakura ask him a question through some sniffles. How did you do it? He turned around. Do what? Fix things with Naruto. She looked down and said, you were only here for around an hour and you already had his complete trust by that point. Sasuke looked at the ground and actually gave a slight smile. Today, when we got to the Hokage's office, we didn't get to say much before the council called a meeting to discuss my return. As a result, Shikamaru had to take us to a room to wait as the council convened. While we were waiting, I tried to talk to him, but he shut me down. So I tried to take a trip down memory lane by talking about the time he pranked Kakashi with that eraser. He shut me down, again. Sakura gave a slight smile as she remembered the joyful genin Naruto used to be. After that I decided to try talking to him about you, and it worked. At this point, Sakura felt like a water balloon because tears were running down her face again. Sasuke looked at her with a bit of pity as he considered what she was going through. He talked to her in a soft voice. Sakura, I don't want you to think I fixed everything when I got here today. He has to know you're sorry. He knew that I was sorry at the Valley of the End. Half of the work was done there, so you're going to have to come up with a better apology than the one you told me you gave him. Not only that, he loves you more and in a different way than he loves me, so you'll probably have to do more than I did. He gave her one last glance before he turned around and pulled the door handle to leave. Sasuke was halted by Sakura's now hoarse voice. Sasuke, thank you. He gave a curt nod and closed the door. Sakura felt like an emotional wreck, but at least she knew Naruto still loved her. Sasuke had given her something she had very little of, hope. As Sasuke was leaving, he jumped onto a rooftop. It was now nighttime, so there was more cover. He browsed the rooftops ahead looking for shadows, then headed back to Naruto's apartment. Ino had more questions than she could wrap her head around. She really needed to talk to Sakura. Hopefully Sakura was awake and willing to talk. As she reached the door to Sakura's apartment, she reached out and gave 3 light knocks. No answer. She knocked 3 more times. Still no answer. Sakura had to be home, right? Where would she be at this time of night? Sure, it wasn't that far past 9 p.m., but Sakura shouldn't be out doing anything around this time. Maybe she just wanted to be alone. Ino said in a sing-songy voice, "Sakura." No answer. "Are you in there?" A hint of slight exasperation was present in her voice. Ino decided to put her ear to the door to hear if there was any activity. Nothing. Sakura was sitting on her kitchen table. She just wanted to be left alone, especially with all that had happened a few moments ago. She needed some time to process the information and decide what to do. She was still crying a little due to her conversation with Sasuke. As she grabbed a tissue, she let out a slight sniffle. That was all Ino needed to hear. "Sakura, I know you're in there." She started knocking rather vehemently. "Open up. I just wanna talk." Sakura put her head down on the kitchen table. She did not want to talk and she wasn't going to budge. Ino thought to herself, "Man, that meeting with Naruto and Sasuke must not have went well at all." She resolved to knock 1 more time before giving up. She gave 3 mildly loud knocks, no answer. She finally stopped knocking and let out a small sigh. Naruto looked at the time as he walked across his kitchen. 9:17. Normally, he wouldn't think it was that late, but he had a training session at 6 a.m. tomorrow. He needed to get some rest. He slipped into some blue sandals and decided he'd go to sleep as soon as Sasuke got back. Sasuke would need some sleep too, that is unless he was nocturnal like Naruto suspected. He wondered if he was slightly crazy for letting him go out by himself, then he remembered the last thing Sasuke said before he left. Why did Sasuke have to pay so much attention to him and Sakura anyway? It wasn't his business, but then again, he was just trying to help. Naruto's thoughts were bouncing around from one way of thinking to another. He dropped down onto the couch, then yelled in a voice of exasperation, "Yuage. This is too confusing." He suddenly heard the laughing of a familiar voice. He scrunched his eyes with a slightly disapproving frown. He entered Kurama's chamber once more. "What are you laughing at?" Kurama was still laughing. Naruto crossed his arms in an almost pouting stance and Kurama finally stopped laughing. "I've watched you, and even been by your side, as you've fought many enemies. Orochimaru, Pain, the Akatsuki, Tobi, Madara, Sasuke, Kagaya and many others. But when it comes to Sakura, you can't seem to figure things out." Kurama was now resting his head on his arm as he looked down at Naruto. Naruto swiveled his head to the side as a sweet ball formed on the side of his forehead. "It's complicated, all right." Naruto uncrossed his arms and looked down. "I don't know, maybe." Kurama looked with pity on the man who was now standing before him. "I don't think so, kid." He paused for a short moment, then continued. "Do you know what the difference is between when you fought all those people and this situation you're dealing with regarding Sakura?" Naruto was still looking dejected and didn't respond. Kurama could tell he was waiting for the answer though, so he spoke up. "When you fought all of those enemies, you always tried your hardest. You always gave it everything you had. I should know because I was there. And when you didn't have enough power to win on your own, you always had your friends to back you up. Those friends are still here, trying to help you right now." He paused before bringing his eye down to Naruto's level. "Don't let life situations change who you are, kid." Then Kurama put his head on his paws and shut his eyes. After Naruto processed all that Kurama had said, he let out a slight smile and whispered, "Thanks, Kurama." The fox simply smiled. Sasuke had just arrived outside Naruto's apartment. He was about to reach for the door, but suddenly stopped short and put his hand down. "There are very few people that can sneak up on me, Kakashi." Kakashi stepped out of the shadows and let out one of his trademark smiles. I've got some experience in the sneaking up on people department. Sasuke gave him a blank stare then asked, "What do you want, Kakashi?" As much as Sasuke didn't want to admit it, he was slightly tired. It had been a long day and now Kakashi was making it longer. Kakashi had a copy of Ichi Ichi Paradise in one hand, he raised the other hand to his chin and looked up pensively before replying. First of all, I thought you were supposed to be within eye's distance of Naruto, at all times. He turned back to Sasuke waiting for an answer. Sasuke looked out over the village as he replied. Me and him both know I have no intentions of leaving the village. He let me go. Did he know you were going to Sakura's? Sasuke's head quickly swiveled over to Kakashi who was now reading a chapter of Ichi Ichi Paradise. Kakashi must have been watching him since he left Naruto's apartment. Do you stalk people for a hobby? Kakashi kept reading as he replied, no, just the ones I care about. Sasuke gave a slight eye roll and said in a monotone voice, what are you really trying to ask me, Kakashi? Kakashi closed his book, put it in his pocket, then crossed his arms and turned to Sasuke. At first, I thought you only cared about clearing your name, but then I noticed you seemed to actually be helping Naruto. When you got here, Naruto was completely closed off to anybody. I doubt that would change for you, so the only explanation left is that there was some effort on your part to restore your previous relations. Now I catch you going to Sakura's without his knowledge. You and I both know that you two aren't involved romantically, so the only reason I could see you going there is to discuss Naruto. Kakashi paused for a second, then continued, to be frank, why are you doing all the things you're doing? All of the things I just mentioned have nothing to do with the sound and the rain, which is supposed to be your reason for being here. Sasuke looked off into the village once more, then paused before replying. I owe him a debt. Kakashi studied him as he replied, ah. So you're trying to help him go back to his old self and fix his relationship with Sakura because you owe him for what happened a few years ago. Sasuke gave a slow nod. Kakashi raised a hand to his chin and said in a hushed voice, now your actions make a little more sense. Kakashi was glad that he was making progress, but he could tell he didn't have all of the information. He looked at Sasuke pensively, then decided to change the subject. Enough about Naruto and Sakura. What about you? Sasuke turned to look at him. What about me? Kakashi leaned against Naruto's balcony before speaking. I'd like to know how you're feeling right now. I know it can't be easy being here knowing about what you did in the past, but somehow you don't seem too unsettled being here. Sasuke looked back out over the village. The past is the past. I can't change what I did, so there's no point dwelling on it. Kakashi was carefully studying Sasuke. Do you really believe that? Sasuke turned away from the village, looked back at Kakashi, then in a voice firm enough to convince himself replied, yes. Then why not come back? It's clear that Konoha has already forgiven you and would welcome you back with open arms. Sasuke looked back out over the city and leaned on Naruto's balcony before whispering in a hushed voice, it's not that simple. Things change. Times change. People, motioning his head towards Naruto's apartment, change. Kakashi dropped his head as he now understood one of the reasons Sasuke hadn't returned to the village. Kakashi now knew one reason why Sasuke was staying away from the village, but there was something else keeping Sasuke away from the village and Kakashi was determined to find out what it was. So let's say, hypothetically speaking, that when you came back, the village was the exact same. Naruto wasn't so unlike himself, Sakura wasn't so depressed all the time, etc. Would you come back then? Sasuke continued to look out over the city as he replied, it's still not that simple. Why not? Sasuke thought for a few moments before replying, this village, it just isn't on my path. Kakashi noted the first two words of that sentence, then after a few seconds of thinking to himself he realized what the second problem was. Kakashi slightly dropped his head as he finally uncovered the two main obstacles keeping Sasuke away from the village. First of all, Sasuke was stuck looking at what could have been. He was probably plaguing himself with thoughts about how if he were here, he maybe could have stopped Naruto from becoming what he was now. Or maybe he would be an accomplished ninja like Naruto, who was now a member of the Anbu. Kakashi let out a sigh as he pondered the first problem. Then he thought about the second obstacle in Sasuke's way, guilt. He had already suspected that Sasuke's self-imposed exile was his way of punishing himself for his betrayal, but his statement about this village not being on his path confirmed Kakashi's suspicions. The shinobi world may have forgiven him, but he still had not forgiven himself. Kakashi paused and then after a few short moments spoke in a light, but firm, voice. Sasuke, you'll never be able to be who you want to be if you keep looking over your shoulder at what could have been. Sasuke continued to look out over the village although he was listening. We've all made mistakes, Sasuke. We've all failed to live the exact way we've wanted to. But failure is something we all have to live with. It's how we overcome it that matters. After a few moments, Kakashi lifted himself from Naruto's balcony and turned to Sasuke with a smile. I think I better get going. It's getting late, and if I know Naruto, you guys have an early training session. Probably for team coordination. Sasuke smirked and gave a slight nod. Kakashi jumped onto the balcony and got ready to jump off. See you around, Sasuke. Right before he jumped he heard Sasuke call his name, Kakashi. Kakashi turned to him. Yes. Do you believe in fate? Kakashi paused for a few moments, looked up, then turned back to Sasuke and replied with a smile, only the kind you make happen. Sasuke smiled and gave a nod. Kakashi returned the nod and jumped off the balcony. As Kakashi moved through the rooftops, he felt a wave of relief at the fact that he now knew Sasuke's intentions were good. Sasuke opened the door to Naruto's apartment to find him fast asleep and snoring on the couch. Sasuke thought about how he was supposed to be the one sleeping on the couch, then let out a small sigh and said in a loud voice, Dobi. If you don't wake up right now I'm taking your room. Sasuke looked at Naruto and was slightly surprised that Naruto immediately woke up. He used to sleep through anything, Anbu had changed a lot about him. Naruto looked over at Sasuke and scrunched his eyes. Then he looked at the time. 9:53. Naruto scrunched his eyes again while looking at Sasuke. Where have you been? Out. Naruto got up and was ready to throw Sasuke across the room. Then he remembered that his attitude was part of the reason Sasuke had left in the first place. He regained his composure, crossed his arms, and swiveled his head up and to the side. Fine. Don't tell me where you went then. Sasuke let out a sigh then noticed Naruto had some clothes folded on the couch. Are those mine? Naruto looked over to the clothes then back to Sasuke. In a more controlled voice he replied, yeah, that is unless you sleep in your fighting